The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We told you last week about the 40,000 Yazidis who were trapped on Mount Sinjar, held there by ISIS with fear of either dehydration or total lack of food causing death if they stay, and of course fear of just being shot, killed, stabbed, who knows what else to death if they try to leave. We now know that based on U.S. military strikes authorized by President Obama that were carried out over the weekend against ISIS targets in Iraq, thousands of those Yazidis have indeed been rescued. Some 20,000 Yazidi Iraqis who had been trapped on Mount Sinjar were rescued and taken to the Syrian-Iraqi border. The Iraq Ministry of Human Rights spokesman Kamil Amin told CNN that Kurdish forces were able to break the siege by ISIS and help thousands of stranded Yazidis board trucks, which then drove to the Syrian border town of Hasaka near Iraq. Lewis, are you surprised by these results? On the one hand, we see that many of these Yazidis have indeed been killed. At the same time, seeing that 20,000 were rescued is a very welcome piece of news.
It is. This is, like I said before, probably the only way to deal with this is to have a superpower step in, conduct some airstrikes, mount a rescue operation, and it worked. I'm glad it was us. I guess one of the few good things we've done recently.
ISIS calls itself the Islamic State. It was known as the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. It reportedly is connected to some of the violent subgroups working in Gaza, not necessarily with Hamas, but in the same area with the same objectives, the establishment of an Islamic caliphate. This is not all good news for the Kurds. Kurdish fighters that were battling ISIS militants lost control of the town of Jalala, which is a very important town strategically. There are so many issues here, Lewis. Issue number one, of course, is related to U.S. involvement, right? Debate over this, debate over, well, this time there really was a humanitarian crisis. It was in part there because the U.S. went in the first place back in 2003 and created this entire situation. So while the U.S. is not really responsible for being the police force of the world, we did cause this problem, so we're in some sense responsible for going there. We also have, of course, the issue, more broadly speaking, of whether this is going to turn into a boots-on-the-ground type of situation. We continue to hear that this is going to be limited to these airstrikes. We know that we have some forces on the ground, not as boots on the ground in the sense we think of it, not there fighting necessarily, but this could very quickly escalate, Lewis. And at this point, President Obama may actually have no choice here in terms of the decisions he has to make. Perhaps not.
I think we should be the ones to handle this. A lot of our listeners might not like hearing that, but we are partially responsible. Certainly, we did not destabilize Libya, or Syria, rather. So who knows? This could have popped up there and carried over on its own, but still, Iraq, I think it's very clear that we are responsible for what's happening in Iraq.
And of course, the often ignored in corporate media Syrian situation that is going on is probably only going to be made worse by tens of thousands of Yazidis then heading to the Iraq-Syria border and possibly into Syria. This is opening up so many different cans of worms when it comes to foreign policy and diplomacy, and we're going to continue carrying it. One specific element I want to tell you about today regarding the new U.S. airstrikes authorized by President Obama in Iraq to help to free Yazidis from this siege by ISIS is that when we look at what we are actually doing there is this very interesting situation, I consider it very sad, that we are bombing our own guns in Iraq. I will explain. In the decade since the 2003 U.S.-led invasion in Iraq, the U.S., as you may know, has spent a fortune training and arming the Iraqi military with the hope that it would be ready to completely secure the country without any help from the United States at all. That meant arming the Iraqi army with significant high-tech, extremely expensive American guns, tanks, jeeps, artillery, and more. But the Iraqi army has in part been a pretty significant failure. And when ISIS invaded northern Iraq from Syria 2 months ago, the Iraqi forces retreated or abandoned en masse. And a lot of them abandoned that American equipment, which of course now is being used by ISIS. And it is the U.S. airstrikes that are now striking much of that U.S. equipment that was given. This is not really a unique thing when we look at history. If you just Google U.S. support of totalitarian, authoritarian regimes, you'll see that there is a long history in just about every continent, actually, of arming individuals, arming groups that eventually we bomb our own weapons. But that just reinforces, Lewis, the absurdity of this entire situation. We are now partly responsible for what's going on there, because the vacuum that appeared when we completely destabilized Iraq by choosing to go in there in 2003 is certainly at least partially connected with what's going on there. And now we're going back in there to bomb our own weapons.
If you look back, just about every Middle East conflict that we're involved in involves us getting shot at with our own guns for one reason or another. And this goes back decades. We were handing guns out in hopes that the militants that we were giving them to would use them against the Russians and things like that. So it is completely absurd. And these guns have just incredible staying power. They're around forever once you put them somewhere.
I get a lot of emails, and I've mentioned this to people, saying, David, you're not really telling the truth about 9/11. Check out this documentary. And it's, of course, a completely conspiratorial, off-the-wall documentary with all sorts of harebrained ideas about what might have happened on 9/11. And that is not an avenue that I think warrants much more investigation at this point. However, there is one particular area of investigation into 9/11 that I think actually would be very valuable to us, and that is the involvement of the Saudi government and Saudi so-called allies in 9/11. Okay, we know that many of the perpetrators in 9/11 were from Saudi Arabia, and there are actually 28 pages in the 9/11 report that have been essentially completely redacted, and they, according to some members of Congress, contain explanations of what was determined to be the Saudi involvement in 9/11. We now have Walter Jones, a Republican from North Carolina, and Stephen Lynch, a Democrat from Massachusetts, who introduced Resolution 428. And what 428 looks to do is simply urge President Obama to release the unredacted 28 pages to the public. 9 other representatives from both parties have co-sponsored the resolution. When Jones was asked about this and about what is in those pages, Jones saw those pages. He was observed while looking at them. He was not allowed to take any notes. He was in one of these secure rooms, and he was able to read what is in those pages. And what he says is, I'll tell you, the 28 pages will be an embarrassment to the previous administration. This is a Republican talking about the Bush administration. We live in a world where certain leaders in certain countries, where there are certain leaders in certain countries that some people are concerned of their reaction. I feel differently. We know that Prince Bandar has been persistently followed by accusations that he withheld what he knows about the 9/11 plot. This is so important to me, Lewis, because when we talk about which relationships with other countries are the source of controversy, the Saudi Arabia one is one that most people say, yeah, you know, I don't really like the idea of being buddy-buddy with these theocratic, authoritarian, anti-woman, anti-gay regimes. I don't like it. But I think I want to rather focus on, usually it's the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or I want to focus on what's going on in Iraq or Syria or North Korea or what's going on with the Cuban embargo. This is a really big deal. And when we think about why there is such a motive, and motive alone does not tell us everything we need to know, but when we look for motive, it's pretty clear, Lewis, that the financial and business and energy relationships we have with Saudi Arabia are ones that members of Congress on both sides would rather leave unaffected.
That's just it. When I hear about this document, do I think that when it is released, if it is released to the public, that it will turn everything on its head and that it will completely change everyone's perspective on 9/11? No. I think that maybe there's some small connection to Saudi Arabia, that the administration, many senators, and the Saudi government wanted to keep under wraps just because of our connection with the royal family and all the oil we get from them.
So you think that that would be the extent of it? I mean, there's other people who say, hold on a second, David. Prince Bandar petitioned the government successfully to evacuate dozens of Saudi citizens from the U.S. That included allegedly members of Osama bin Laden's family, so on and so forth. And that starts to bleed over into some of the broader conspiracy theorists' ideas. You think it will be much more limited, still significant, more embarrassing diplomatically than a big blockbuster that will turn everything on its head?
Probably. I think this is just about maintaining that, I guess you could call it a good relationship with Saudi Arabia.
A week or two ago, I told you the story of a man who works at the prestigious Barrow Neurological Institute in Phoenix who was arrested at the Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport. When he showed up, his name is Peter Steinmetz, 54 years old, white guy, that is relevant to the story I'm telling you, showed up with a rifle strapped on his back, had no business at the airport, got a coffee there supposedly, or said he was just there to get coffee, and then he took the gun off of his back and actually pointed it at a woman and her daughter. He was subsequently arrested, okay? It did not devolve into a SWAT situation responding to an armed individual. Nothing of the like took place. We now have a new story from just a few days ago where 22-year-old African-American man, John Crawford, was shot dead inside of a Walmart by police in Beaver Creek, Ohio. What happened? Well, a shopper called 911 to report that there was an individual inside the store carrying a gun. Now we know that it was simply a BB gun known as a variable pump air rifle. It is sold by Walmart, or at least it was up until that day. The wife of the caller insists that she was on the phone with Crawford and that Crawford was examining the gun, and it was a, not to call it a toy gun, but it was a BB gun, an air rifle of sorts. Lewis, police show up. Supposedly, Crawford does not respond to their commands, and then he ends up getting shot dead in a Walmart. Now, some witnesses do say that Crawford was pointing the gun at customers and children. However, if we think about the fact that it's a BB gun and it may have pointed in the direction of customers and children, we don't really know exactly what happened. But what we do know is that at an airport, an individual showed up with what is clearly a real gun strapped to his back and pointed it in the direction of individuals, and police showed up, and he did get arrested, but there was no massive armed response that put the individual's life in danger. We now here have a younger black man who shows up and picks up a BB gun, and he is shot dead by police in the Walmart. Now, there may be specific details here that explain why the situations were handled so differently, but time and time again, Lewis, when we think about the open carry groups, which show up at restaurants with all sorts of guns strapped to their legs, waistbands, and backs, and people ask them to leave politely, oh, could you please, if you don't mind, please just, exercise your Second Amendment rights somewhere else if it doesn't bother you too much. And then we have a gun that is sold at a Walmart, picked up, and the guy ends up dead based on cops shooting up and showing up and shooting him. We have to be talking about race here.
I'm sure it had something to do with it. I think it's weird to think about how you would react in a situation like this. I'm not sure how I would assume that if I'm holding a toy gun, even though I know it's a toy gun, and a police officer yells at me, I would think to myself, just drop this gun. It's not worth even trying to explain what's happening here.
I don't disagree.
But perhaps he was in such shock at how ridiculous the whole incident was that he just didn't react the proper way.
Let me just ask two questions and think about the answers to these questions honestly, ladies and gentlemen. Don't just brush them off. Does anyone truly think that if Mr. Crawford were a 40-year-old white man in an Oxford shirt and loafers, that he would have been killed in the exact same way by police at Walmart for picking up the BB gun? Do you honestly think it would have been the same? And let me ask a different question. If instead of a 50-something-year-old white guy at the Phoenix airport, it had been a 22-year-old black man that showed up with a rifle and pointed it in the direction of this white mom and her daughter, would the reaction have been the same there? To show up and say, we have to arrest you because you pointed the gun, and even though you can carry it, you held it in a way. If you honestly think the situations would be identical if the races were reversed, I would love to talk to you.
We have tons of stories that we've covered where a black person is automatically assumed,
Violent.
there's the assumption of violence. There's the assumption that this person is dangerous, and it's just, but if it's an old white guy, you think, oh, it's probably some Tea Party libertarian type who just wants to walk around with a gun.
And as we know, Lewis, there's no right-wing domestic terrorism conducted in this country by white men.
Of course not. Never happened ever.
Let's take a break. We have a great program for you today. Glad you're with us on this Monday.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show membership program is made possible in part by liberalbias.com because, liberals think they're so cool with their fancy statistics and math, but conservatives do have numerology. Find out more ways to use numbers without that pesky liberal bias by going to liberalbias.com. Today's new member of the day is Rick Cook. Rick, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. It is because of members like Rick that we are now on year 9 without funding from big media conglomerates or big corporations. We are funded directly by the audience. Go to davidpakman.com/membership to become a member today. And later I'll tell you about today's bonus show. It is an excellent bonus show. If you do any shopping on Amazon.com, you can support this program simply by first going to our website, davidpakman.com, and clicking on the Amazon banner on the right side of the page. You click it, bookmark it, use it when you shop, no forms to fill out. It sends us a kickback from Amazon, doesn't cost you any extra. Couple of interesting purchases made through the Amazon link over the last week. One is the book, Heaven is for Real. Now, Lewis, I'm sure you've heard of the movie that was based on this book, which purports to be proof that heaven is real. It's based on a boy's stories of what he told his parents that during a medical intervention, I think it was that he temporarily was in heaven is the claim that's made, and the parents absolutely buy it. I'm very curious whether the person who bought the book bought it because they believe it as a story of the existence of heaven, or if they're more interested in critiquing it. I actually know a couple of people that have read this book. Everybody I know thought it was just laughably fact-free and just basically speculation about what a little kid decided to tell his parents. But that being said, I'm curious whether it was purchased for a critical point of view or because they buy into it. Or maybe they're just going in with an open mind and saying, I'll read it and then I'll see what I think.
Who knows? Maybe it was a gag. I don't know. I guess I'd be open to reading it just out of curiosity.
Also, a couple of purchases of some of my favorite movies from when I was a kid, Major League and Major League 2. You remember those two movies, Lewis? Back when Charlie Sheen was crazy in a very different type of way than he is now. Every time I see those movies on TV, it's still very easy to just say, oh, I'm just going to watch one segment before they go to commercial, and then I watch the whole movie.
I know what you mean. It's if anything, it's certainly nostalgic.
Yeah, no question about it. And also a lot of maple syrup purchases. I had a funny conversation the other day, Lewis, growing up in New England. When you go to breakfast places, there's real maple syrup there. Sometimes you're charged extra for it, sometimes you're not. But a lot of people in different parts of the country, they're used to syrup, right? Which is very, very different than maple syrup. And way more people than I know actually bring New England maple syrup as a gift to people when they travel.
If it's hard to get in certain areas of the country, it sounds like a great gift to me. I love this stuff. That fake stuff is the nastiest crap in the world. I hate it.
Texas has a new idea. The idea is let's allow alcohol at gun shows. There's a Texas agency that regulates alcohol sales, and they're considering a rule change which would allow alcohol at gun shows as long as the guns are disabled, there's no live ammunition in the facility, and no guns are delivered to buyers on the premises. Of course, the pro-gun groups are completely against this. They say I thought they were going to be against it because they thought the rules were too restrictive, but they say, you know what, we don't really need alcohol there because it's really more important that people who buy guns are able to get the guns that day. What's the point of going to the gun show if then later someone has to mail you the gun? That being said, this is not immediately an effective rule change. There will be 30 days of comment available. The proposed rule would also allow alcohol sales at historic reenactments that involve firearms, as long as the firearms are historically accurate and kept unloaded or only loaded with blanks. Because as we know, Lewis, there has never been an accidental or negligent shooting when guns are supposedly unloaded.
I think I know why they want alcohol at gun shows, and I think I know why all the vendors want alcohol at gun shows. Clearly, it's because the more you drink, the more likely are you just to throw money around and buy a ton of guns. So they just make more money.
You think that's what it is? It's just a financial thing? As it is, when we hear about people being shot in the abdomen at gun shows with what were supposedly unloaded guns, I would not go to a gun show, full stop. I have no other qualifying statements. I would not go to a gun show. Once you introduce alcohol, the chances of me going don't really change because I already wouldn't go. But hopefully for some people, they would say, you know what? Maybe I'll just buy my guns at the local store instead of going to these gun shows where people are drinking.
David might actually leave the state if there is a gun show with alcohol, just temporarily until it ends.
We heard about Sarah Palin's new political video channel thing that's going to have an online subscription service that presumably people will pay for. The channel will be dedicated to so-called Real America. The Sarah Palin political video channel was obviously going to be hilarious from the get-go, but we now actually have a little bit more data. I'm going to play a 46-second video for you. Sarah Palin decided in one of her first videos to take a real swing at that liberal Elizabeth Warren and the speech that she gave. Actually, I was there in person for this speech at Netroots Nation in Detroit a couple of weeks ago. Sarah Palin decided to do a rebuttal of this video, okay? And the place where it went wrong for Sarah Palin was when she started trying to use words. As soon as she started trying to use those words to criticize Elizabeth Warren, the entire thing fell apart. Sarah Palin continuing her incredibly brutal assault on the English language as we know it. Here is the video. Take a listen to this.
Fast food workers deserve a livable wage, and that means when they take to the picket line, we are proud to fight alongside them.
We believe, wait, I thought fast food joints? Don't you guys think that they're like of the devil or something? That's what, liberals, you want to send those evil employees who would dare work at a fast food joint that you just don't believe in. Thought you wanted to, I don't know, send them to purgatory or something. So they all go vegan. And wages and picket lines, I don't know, they're not often discussed in purgatory, are they? I don't know, why are you even worried about fast food wages? Because, well, we believe in America where minimum wage jobs, they're not lifetime gigs, they're stepping stones.
It's actually really nice, Lewis, for a change, to hear someone give an intelligent, well-informed, poignant critique of a political speech. That's not what we just heard from Sarah Palin. I'm just saying it is nice when somebody actually does that, but far from it is what we saw there from Sarah Palin. I actually was questioning Lewis first whether this was some kind of a parody. She actually was using real Republican talking points, so it wasn't a parody. I crossed that off the list. I thought maybe she was under the effect of a really strong dose of benzodiazepines or something, and right now that seems like a far more reasonable explanation.
I think what was happening here was that, well, this footage wasn't really supposed to be live, right? I mean, that's kind of what I'm thinking. Would you agree?
In other words, I'm not sure I know what you're even saying.
Like this was, I don't know if she knew that the camera was running or that this was going to be used. I mean, it sounds like she's just trying to think of things to say.
There's an idea.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know if that's true, though. I don't know if that's true, though. I agree with what you're saying, that it seems like this was her warming up. But as far as I know, this was released as a critique of what, I mean, it's edited with video of Elizabeth Warren.
It is, and maybe someone's playing a prank on her. But I assume this is what she does to warm up, and I love it because I consider Sarah Palin like a fine chef of word salads, and it's just fascinating to hear how she comes up with these word salads with just what seems like a chopped up mess of all sorts of different words.
Let me actually make a different analogy, Louis, to the word salad. Chefs, your analysis is more brilliant than even I think you imagined, and I'm sure, knowing you, that you think it was pretty brilliant, and I do too. Chefs are able to use ingredients in combinations and ways that most people wouldn't think of doing that, or using them, right? And along those lines, Sarah Palin, the word salad chef, is able to take words and combine them in ways that no other speaker of the English language has ever done. So in that sense, yes, she is like a fine chef.
Truly a pioneer and an avant-garde chef, I guess we could say.
She's the equivalent of that jazz where you hear unrelated sounds. You hear like one note played by the saxophone, and then a hi-hat followed by a snare hit, and then the bass strums one note. That's the equivalent for what Sarah Palin does with words.
I guess a lot of people think it's absolutely brilliant because people still worship her.
Bill Scher joins us next. We'll talk about immigration. We'll talk about Republicans and the midterm elections. Stay with us.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
We're joined today by Bill Scher. He is a senior writer at Campaign for America's Future. He has been following the immigration debate and the apoplexy around immigration from some on the right. Bill, it's really interesting what's going on because on the one hand, we have very significant anti-Hispanic xenophobia. We now have talk of Ebola being used to also explain why we should close the border with Mexico. We have Michelle Bachmann saying maybe President Obama wants to use Central American immigrant children for medical experiments. The crazy wing of the Republican immigration opposition. But at the same time, we're seeing some more reasonable Republicans on immigration win some primaries, are we not?
Every Republican senator who was up for re-election this year, who voted for the bipartisan Senate immigration reform bill, won their primary. That's Lindsey Graham in South Carolina, that's Susan Collins in Maine, and then just last week, Lamar Alexander in Tennessee. So this notion that there is this big right-wing anti-immigrant backlash that's sweeping the nation that cost Eric Cantor his House seat, that doesn't really wash. We're seeing those Republicans that took that leap have been able to defend themselves quite ably. These weren't nail-biter races. Yet the House Republicans are consumed by this anti-immigrant frenzy. It has bedeviled John Boehner the last year and a half. And it's a big risk for them, not just in 2016 and beyond, because the Republican Party can't appeal to Latinos, but there are a number of House races this year where Latinos could actually make a difference and cause some upsets on Election Day.
So we'll get a little more specifically into the 2014 election and your thoughts on what's best for Republicans a little bit later. Specifically on this issue of immigration, I was speaking last week with Fernando Espuelas, who hosts a great show on Univision. It's half Spanish, half English. He's from Uruguay. And he was saying that oftentimes there is a tendency on the left to want to see the, I hate to use the term academic, but the on-paper reasons for why Republicans oppose immigration from certain countries. And at a certain point, we just have to be honest that there is an element of just flat-out xenophobia here. How prevalent, though, do you think that is as a factor in informing the positions of Republicans on immigration, on candidates, I'm saying here? Or do they have more of a pragmatic approach of what's going to be best for them electorally?
Oh, I mean, there have been reports before that the House Republican caucus was actually pretty split down the middle between the anti-immigrant xenophobes and those that are more pragmatic. But they were so afraid of losing their primaries and suffering right-wing backlash or having depleted base turnout in the general election that they're afraid of taking a leap unless they absolutely have to. And look, they will likely keep the House this year, and they got a pretty good chance of taking over the Senate this year. Those Senate races are largely in states that don't have big Hispanic populations. So it's not obviously imminent that they take the leap today, even if they know they might have to take that leap at some point down the road. So I don't think it's quite that they are They believe that it's in their interest long term to pander to this constituency. They don't feel the pinch to do it right now. Although, as I've argued, I do think there are a handful of races where that pinch might actually come to play this year.
So let's talk a little bit about the midterm elections that are coming up. You have in your new piece in The Week today, you actually say the Republicans may be better off not winning, not doing well in these upcoming elections, because as we're seeing on immigration and on other issues, it's not like there's going to be some great Republican consensus on what to do if and when they are able to wield power.
Well, think about it for a second. How well has the House been run this year? How unified has the Republican Party been this year? How well developed is their agenda for an alternative policy strategy been this year? It's all a farce. It's been a farcical year and a half for Republicans in the House. They're not ready for prime time. They're not ready to hit the ground running with a new policy agenda. So what happens if they take over the Senate? Which, look, could well happen. All you're doing is expanding the GOP civil war into a second front.
Well, there's a second possibility, though, right? Because if you look at it, looking at the last year and a half, the way you look at it, the way I look at it, the way reasonable individuals with any connection to reality look at it, we have the point of view you just espoused. But if you're someone who believes everything President Obama wants to or would do is bad, and you believe in this kind of pie-in-the-sky small government that many right-wingers believe in, you might think that what they've been doing is actually really good in that they've just been getting in the way of President Obama. The problem that I see with that is if and when you actually control both sides of Congress, not doing anything is no longer really a strategy, is it?
Well, that's the big problem. They can obstruct Obama's agenda with just owning the House. They don't need the Senate to be obstructionist for the last 2 years. So there's not a lot of benefit to be gained by winning that House. They can be a bigger problem on judicial nominations. If there was, say, a Supreme Court nomination that opened up, that would be a stickier fight. But it's also a big opportunity for a more GOP civil war if there's a faction of Republicans that doesn't think it makes sense to block any Obama nomination whatsoever. What I think is a more likely happenstance if Republicans take over the Senate is, Boehner might have successfully obstructed Obama pretty much across the board, but it's been pretty ugly getting to that point. You had to suffer the shutdown humiliation. You had to suffer this immigration vote last week, where now every Republican, save for 11, are on record supporting the deportation of dreamers who grew up in America and have no connection to their birth countries. That's got a big albatross over the neck for a long time. Issues like disaster relief and expanding domestic violence protections. These are things that conservatives fought against, and Boehner had to, jigger the system to sneak those bills through. Those kinds of fights might be more public, more high profile, more humiliating, more awkward in a situation where they own both houses. The expectation for responsibility to govern is doubled. What Ted Cruz and Rand Paul can do to needle the GOP leadership would be much more magnified in that circumstance. So if they were ready to deal with those problems, winning the Senate would be an opportunity, not a cost. But they don't seem to be ready to deal with those problems. They seem to be susceptible to being jerked around by the Tea Party tail wagging the leadership dog.
What's your sense of how Republican insiders see the results of the midterm elections that are just a few months away in terms of what it might mean for them for 2016? And I haven't even begun the early pointless speculation on 2016 candidates yet, but I'm curious if you have a sense of what Republican insiders might see as the possible impact on 2016 of what might happen in a few months.
Well, we just had an article in the New York Times over the weekend suggesting the Republican leadership is starting to think about what their legislative agenda should be.
Yeah.
John Boehner in the Politico on Friday said, "I haven't given it much thought what the agenda should be." So there's this back of the mind sense they got to work on that if they want 2016 to be extremely complicated. But they certainly don't have the plan in hand, and all these little fights that keep cropping up inside the House now become problems for every Republican presidential candidate. What does a governor who's running for president do when they want to say Washington's dysfunctional, you need a governor like me, blah, blah, blah. What happens if there's another shutdown threat because a budget battle with Obama with a full Republican Congress is just too irresistible for the Tea Party? Do they blame Washington? Do they have to blame Republicans in that circumstance? That's a very awkward situation for a Chris Christie or a Scott Walker or a Jeb Bush to have to be in.
Yeah, no question about it. And well, Chris Christie's a whole other situation. I think he's completely, I think he has no chance at this point. I mean, I think he's not even a factor. Do you agree?
I generally agree, but I thought that about Mitt Romney in 2012 because he did a Romney Care. At some point, someone's got to win. There's someone who's less worse than everybody else.
That's true. Maybe Chris Christie will distance himself from everything he did. Who knows? We've been speaking with Bill Scher. He is senior writer for Campaign for America's Future. Make sure to check out his new piece in The Week. Bill, pleasure as always to have you on.
Thanks very much.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
A church has canceled a gay man's funeral, and they canceled it during the man's wake. Our friend John Becker writes about this over at the Bolerico Project. If you can imagine losing your son with all the trauma that entails, and then being told at the wake, as you're near his body, that the funeral is being canceled because he was gay. That is exactly what happened to a grieving mother in Tampa, Florida. According to WFLA, Julie Atwood was standing at her son's casket when the phone rang. The church where her son's funeral was scheduled to be held the next day decided to abruptly cancel the service after the pastor learned that the deceased was gay and his obituary listed a surviving husband. Atwood was told that it would be blasphemous to hold the services at the church because her son, Julian Evans, 42 years old, was gay. It was devastating. I did feel like he was being denied the dignity of death, said his mother. Evans' husband, Kendall Capers, says the pair were partners for 17 years. They were married last year in Maryland, and Evans died at home after a 4-year illness with a rare disease called amyloidosis, which destroys organs in the body. This is just absolutely sickening. Apparently, this was outrage from people who saw the obituary, right? The church had agreed to do this, and the initial church where they went to couldn't hold the number of people they were expecting, so they asked New Hope Missionary Baptist Church, which is a larger church, for permission to do the funeral there. The church agreed, but then the obituary was published, and it changed everything because of the outcry from congregants at that larger church. I suppose, Lewis, that in the interest of religious freedom, they would cancel funerals for fornicators, adulterers, divorcees, people who got remarried, people who lust after others, people living with partners they're not married to, people who have kids out of wedlock, because all of those things are against God, aren't they?
I guess so. I think that those who are not religious or those who are not, interested in religion need to start distancing themselves from the church, from religious organizations. Don't have your wedding at a church if you're not religious. Don't do it just to please your parents. Don't have these funerals or wakes at churches just to please other people around you.
I've actually been to several Catholic weddings where I asked the people getting married, I didn't know that being married in a Catholic church was important to you. And they said, it's not. It's just that, one of our parents, like one of our 4 parents or 2 of our 4 parents kind of want it because that's the way they did it, so we're going to do it. Yeah, and it just bolsters this entire institution, as it were. And to the pastor who made the call to cancel the funeral, is this what a man of God does? You cancel a funeral during a wake because of these arbitrarily established rules that were broken, only some of which appear to matter to you, right? Because you don't hear anybody who cheated being denied a funeral at a church. At least I've certainly never heard that. Just sickening, Lewis.
And who knows if they even would have canceled it if there was no outrage from members of the church and from people who noticed this in the paper. There's a lot of pandering here to those people, and I don't know. I guess they like the money, so they have to pander.
Former NASCAR racing champion Tony Stewart hit and killed a driver who left his damaged car mid-race at the Canandaigua Motorsports Park in upstate New York, according to reports from Sunday. ESPN.com said that Stewart, who is a three-time NASCAR Sprint Cup Series champion, first bumped the victim's car and then knocking it out of the race on Saturday. On his next time around the track, the driver, who has been identified as Kevin Ward Jr., 20 years old, got out of his vehicle and was pointing to Tony Stewart, apparently wanting to confront him right then and there. Tony Stewart then ran him over, killing him seemingly instantly. We have video of this. This is graphic video. You don't see blood, but I am letting you know that you will see the individual be hit, and we later learned that he did die. So if you don't want to see that, just skip ahead 40 seconds. Let me play the video, and then I want to discuss a couple elements of this with you. So after this incident, Stewart released a statement saying, "There aren't words to describe the sadness I feel about the accident that took the life of Kevin Ward Jr. It's a very emotional time for all involved. My thoughts and prayers are with the family," etc. And then the following day, a sheriff in the area told reporters, "At this very moment, there are no facts that would substantiate or support a criminal charge or indicate criminal intent on the part of any individual." Some individuals say that Tony Stewart clearly tried to hit him on purpose. When you look at this video, the camera shot is too zoomed in to see whether Stewart specifically tried to line himself up to hit the victim, or whether this was a last-minute thing where he pops out and Tony Stewart has no way of avoiding it. I really don't know how I feel about this, Lewis. Aside from my personal thoughts about Tony Stewart, which are pretty limited. It's not a sport that I really follow. What I do know is that one of the primary rules of racing is don't get out of your vehicle during a race on the track unless it's on fire and you have no choice, right? And that was certainly violated here. That's a totally separate issue from whether Tony Stewart deliberately tried to run this man over.
Clearly very foolish to get out of the car. It seemed he was very angry, but Tony Stewart is a pro. And I think I can't say with certitude that he wanted to kill this guy, that he wanted to hit this guy, but I can tell you that he wanted to get as close as possible to scare him. And that is obviously completely unacceptable. So as far as I'm concerned, yes, Tony Stewart is a murderer. He could have easily completely avoided this man. He could have hit the brakes. He didn't do any of those things.
Do you agree with Lewis, and many people emailing me do, saying this should be not only a lifetime ban from racing, this should be criminal charges? Or do you believe that it was the victim, Kevin Ward Jr., who did the wrong thing by getting out of his vehicle, and that Tony Stewart may well have had no way to even avoid hitting him? Let me know what you think. We will follow up on this, and we will have a final report as to whether any charges will come. 219-2-DAVID-P is our voicemail number. Here is, this is incredible. 2 consecutive days with, not counting the Friday show since we do audience questions, 2 consecutive shows with positive comments. Listen to this.
Hi, David and Lewis. I just wanted to let you both know how much I enjoy your television program. I get it on Free Speech TV.
Thank you.
I've been watching you both now for many years, ever since you first appeared on Free Speech TV. Really glad that I get more of you through the week. And earlier in the evening, too, that's nice, instead of like 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And my favorite part of the program is Patriot Mail, because America, because freedom.
Yeah, Lewis, this is quickly becoming a rallying cry of anti-Hatriots. Because America, because freedom. And it's just amazing. Hatriot Mail has just really taken off.
I think it might be our best idea. Of course, it's David. It's just so prolific. And,
of course,
and
it only
profound.
was we curated the idea, but really
Right.
it was one person's idea to send in a voiceover, and that is, of course, the Hatriot Mail narrator.
Right.
Another person's idea to call it Hatriot Mail. So I take responsibility for curating this, but really the elements were actually developed by the audience.
I guess when I say our, I mean it's all inclusive. It's the narrator, the fans, and of course the Hatriots themselves.
On today's bonus show, Sketch Factor. Is it racist or not? We will explain the entire thing to you. A bear seen walking through New Jersey on its hind legs, and deep sea fish farming. All of that and more on today's bonus show. Go to davidpakman.com/membership to sign up and get access to the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.